G'day guys and welcome back to the Supercoach Swordplay channel for another Game Day squad video for 2025 ahead of round 20. Can you believe it? We're almost there towards the end of the season and towards finals time. I'm joined by Rossco today for the Game Day squad round 19 review and round 20 preview. Firstly, how are you going, mate?
Yeah, good. Doing very well. It's a good weekend of footy this weekend. Didn't do so well in the old game day squad, but that's why we're here to break it down. And,
Yeah.
you know, the viewers get a good perspective from your side, and then they get a not so good perspective from my side. But, I know I've mentioned it in the past, but, all it takes is two or three bad selections and your week's gone, which makes it really tricky, especially when you try and go against the pack.
Yeah,
But that's why we're here as well. We've got to try and pick out the locks. We've got to try and pick out
that's
the
it.
fades, which I believe you and DR maybe didn't do the best job of last week. And then
Oh.
hopefully nail some pods as well. So, yeah, without further ado, I reckon you could sort of give us a bit of a breakdown of your round and how you went and, all that sort of fun stuff, because I think you did a lot better than I did.
Look, mate. Firstly, welcome back from Thailand. I did have to mention that you had a good couple of weeks off break there. In terms of the squads last week, finished 20th in starter, so I was happy with that. Finished 28th in contender and finished 31st in classic across the three comps. So 8th in contender overall. I'm still a way off the pack, so about what is that? 207 points off the leader, but only 60 points off of fourth. So it's very
Mm.
tied up at the top. In terms of the cards that are played in contender, is a bit annoying. Sort of the goals were looking a bit okay. And then Baz Smith, just couldn't get the job done there. Faded Dacos across all competitions, which was an absolute disaster. Um, and then, yeah, look, I think there was some sort of speculative picks that didn't necessarily work out, but I was very happy with Matty Kennedy's bounce back game. We did call it last week right here on the channel, which we're going to talk through sort of what we did last in terms of how our last week's locks, avoids, and pods went. But Roscoe, very quickly, your round review.
Yeah, my numbers are nowhere near as good as yours. Although I know a couple of weeks ago they were, so it'll always come back.
It will.
Starter, I got to 237th. Contender 126th and 99th for Classic. But that does put me down to 47th in the season leaderboard now for Contender. So I think I might be a bit out of reach of the top. But there is the top three every week for those All-Star cards. And another one that you're not in officially over on the Discord, the GDS Rookie League finals are starting this week. So
Yes,
I'm
mate.
sure she'll be watching this video, Mel's Misfits. I've got a big elimination final in Classic this week against her. Hopefully I can pull through there. And then I'll be one step closer into the semi-finals. And if I win the semi-final, you're guaranteed an All-Star card for finishing in the prelims or higher. So hopefully I need 2 wins in 2 weeks in Classic
Fingers
to
crossed, mate.
get through to the to the prelims, get myself an All-Star card that way. But also trying to get to a top 3 finish in Contender one round before the end of the year to get an All-Star card as well. So we'll see how we go.
That's it, mate. All the best there. All right. We're going to go through our locks, avoids, and pods from last week. So, all about transparency here. Now, we labeled, 8 players as locks last week, and all of them scored above 100. So, Brody Grundy, 146, tick. Jordan Dawson and Errol Goulden both scored 102. So, we'll give them ticks, but very speculative ticks there. Lockie Whitfield, 129, big tick. Lockie Ash, 131, big tick. Maxi Holmes, 145, tick. Finn Callahan, 126, another big tick there. And Brian Myers, 103. So we'll take that. We'll call that 8 out of 8 locks. Happy with that in terms of sort of anything above 100 you sort of take from a lock. The avoids. Now, here's a mixed bag, mate. So DI and I went out on record and said that Nicky Dacos, possibly getting some Corey Wagner attention, goes out and scores 194, 43 touches and a goal. Absolute disaster class there. And I know a lot of good coaches did fade Nicky Dacos as well. So the little master's just gone stuff for you guys and just put out an absolute monster score. Maxi Gorn was another avoid that we had coming up against Mark Pidnett, who hasn't played, he hasn't really performed well against in the last couple of years. 116. Another one that will just cop on the chin as one that, yeah, look, we probably didn't get that one right. Colby McKercher, though, we were adamant that he would probably get some James Jordan attention, which he did. Only finished on a 91, which was much lower than sort of the average that he'd been going at leading up to it. So I reckon we take that one. And then Naz. So last week I mentioned that Naz is probably a card that you may not want to fade altogether, but instead of putting a gold, you may put a silver, or silver. Instead of a silver, you put a bronze. He's gone out to put a 182. I think he's untaggable. Roscoe's a Saints man. Do you think that he's just one of those cards where you just lock and load in every week, regardless of what the variant is?
Yeah, for me, he is. I'm going to be doing my best efforts this week to get my hands on a gold for Contender as well now. I think he might just be first picked every week.
Yeah.
I've got a platinum for him in Classic. Might have to even have a look for a diamond, although I don't think I could get away with playing 2 diamonds in the 1 week in Classic, but we'll see how we go. It'd be a nice card to have anyway.
Nah, for sure, mate. And then in terms of the pods, here's where the money's at. So we mentioned Tom McCarthy slash the other West Coast attacking halfback in Liam Duggan. So McCarthy scored 81, Duggan 131. I think we will
Ooh,
take some chockies there. Timmy Taranto,
yep,
147. Now, here's the
yep.
big one. Here's the big pod, mate. Isaac Heaney,
Oh,
202 game day squad points. These are all with the base card, by the way. Filthy.
wow.
Filthy, filthy, filthy. And Matty Kennedy, 117. So, in a week that was quite tough for forwards, Matty Kennedy came through. I think we did okay across the board there, mate. So, in terms of the locks, we'll say 8 out of 8. In terms of the avoids, we probably went 1 out of 4. So, bit to work on there. And then in terms of the pods, I reckon that's a 3.5 out of 4 with the half on McCarthy slash Duggan there. So let's build on that this week, mate, and head straight on over to round 20. So I'm just going to go through the matchups as we do every single week. So we got Hawthorn coming up against Carlton at the MCG, Essendon against the Dogs at Marvel Stadium. We have a lot of rivalry matches this week. So hear us out. We got the Battle of the Bridge, GWS against Sydney at NG Stadium, Gold Coast against Brisbane in the Q Clash at People's First Stadium, Fremantle against West Coast at Optus Stadium, Adelaide against Port Adelaide at Adelaide Oval. And then we have some interesting matchups for some of our game day squad players. North Melbourne against Geelong at Marvel, Richmond against Collingwood at the MCG, and St Kilda against Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. So, Ross, you can kick us off. Who's going to be your first lock for round 20 this week?
I think my first pick player, we touched on it in the podcast, a lot of people's VCs. I think Bontempelli has to go in there. Now, I'm very lucky to own the Diamond, so the Diamond will be getting fielded in Classic. Looking at getting a gold version of him for Contender, and then obviously we'll definitely be playing the bronze in Classic. We saw what those Giants mid did last week to Essendon. I think Bont can go huge.
Nah, mate, I love that. I love that there. And in terms of the points that he's sort of putting up, like he can get points for fun, and he just does it. He scored, what is it, 125 last week in a tough matchup for him. What can he do now coming up against Essendon? I'm going to go with the player that we just talked about before, Nick Dacos. In his past 4 games, he's had scores 162, 155, and now 194 with his base card. Coming up against Richmond, he could do anything. So I think that is definitely a lock which we can look at there. And yeah, I think probably should be one of the first pick players this week as well. Roscoe, your second lock.
Yes, I'm sticking with the Bulldogs trend. It's easy pickings playing against Essendon, I think, but he played against them last time and got 49 touches and a big score, which I missed out on. So I don't want to miss out on it again. Bailey Dale, playing against one of the easiest matchups for designated kickers, halfbacks. I think we just have to lock and load him. I don't know if I'd be going all in with like a high level card. His scoring can be a little bit hit and miss sometimes, but I think he should do enough to get himself to a 120 or 130 at a minimum. Whether he goes mega big for that sort of 170 plus, I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think we should be picking him definitely. Although I think maybe our golds could be better invested in like Bont and Dacos, definitely.
Yeah. Nah, that's all good, mate. My next card, now I have a diamond off him as well. A player that's going to come up against North Melbourne this week at Marvel Stadium. Now, normally I'd combine these two players together, but I'm going to separate them because there's a bit of a discussion point we're going to have about the other one. But I'm going to go with Max Holmes. So Max Holmes, in sort of his last 6 weeks, we know what he's performed this season. He's got scores of 137, 141, 125, 170, 158, 143, and 145, all within his last 9 games. He's gone below the ton in game day squad with his sort of base card only 3 times in the last 10 games. So ultra consistent, great matchup. And I think that if you can get any kind of variant on him, especially in Contender and Classic, and even in any of the comps really, that I think is a really wise way to go there. Rossco, your
Yeah,
third lock.
I'm a big fan of the Max Holmes pick there, I must say. He did take
Yeah,
a lot of kickouts as well when I went down to Geelong to watch him play on Sunday, which is promising. He's starting in the midfield, but then he's also getting back to take the kickouts, which is like the dream for fantasy
absolutely
owners
love it.
alike. Um,
It's like Nick
my next,
Dacos as well. How good.
yeah, my next lock is one who is in a rivalry game. I currently have him gold in Contender because I think he could go big, and he did go big the last time they played earlier this season. Andy Brayshaw. Um,
Yeah,
I
love
just
it.
like the matchup, like against the Eagles. I don't think he'll cop a tag, and I'm more confident in him putting up a massive score than Sarong. Although that said, the last time they played, both of them scored pretty well. I think Brayshaw just got the chockies on him there.
Nah, that's brilliant, mate. My third lock, before we get to a flashpoint in this podcast to talk about a very key line, my last lock is Naz. I mean,
Mm.
we just talked about him before. We've been hyping him up basically forever now, in terms of sort of the play there is. Even though last week I did mention the fade, but I'm all on board now. His last 6, his last 8 games, hear this out, with his base card, this is 165, 147, 159, 151, 137, 176, the 93, oh, whatever, 182. If you can get anything on him in terms of silver, a gold, platinum, diamond, if you're the lucky, I don't even know if his elite has been packed yet, but if you're in that position to get any sort of variant on him, get him into your side. Melbourne, we know that it's going to be a tight game. I get the sense, but I think that that's definitely a card that you want to have in. All right, Roscoe, we're very interestingly, we didn't mention any of the rucks as a lock this week
Mm.
because I think this brings us to the flashpoint. That's a new segment we're going to call it here on the sort of round preview episode, the flashpoint, the turning point in terms of our game day squad team. So we think that there are 3 sort of ruckmen that you could probably sort of consider between playing this week. That's Max Gawn against St Kilda, Rowan Marshall, Brodie Grundy against the Giants and Kieran Briggs, and Tim English against Essendon and whoever ruck they play, whether it's Vigo Vicentini or Todd Goldstein. What's your sort of which way you lean at the moment in terms of which 2 of 3 do you ideally want to start across the competitions, or are you looking to diversify those 3 players across the competitions you play in?
No, I think I'm very superstitious. I don't like to pick different ones across the comps. I like to sink or swim, basically. You know, if I have good scores in one comp, I want to make sure I have them across all the comps. You know, it's nothing worse than say I pick English in only starter and he goes 200 and then I haven't picked him in the other 2. You know, that makes me obviously glad that I've got him in starter, but it's quite frustrating that I didn't just pick him across all 3. So I think I am leaning with the classic Gandhi. English's scores, I was looking at them earlier, have been very, very consistent. Now, I'll just quickly bring them up because he's scoring really, really well. In the last couple of weeks, he was down a bit last week with 111. And then before that, he scored 136, 130, 96, 161, 133, 152. So he's going pretty well, Tim English. Now, this matchup against Essendon, we don't really know who he'll be playing against, but I think he'll still go quite well. I'm just backing Gorn against Rowan Marshall. Historically, he's performed very well against him. And I remember last year, I think he had his biggest game of the season against us. And Grundy obviously is in such a rich vein of form. Kieran Briggs isn't really too oppressive. He's been in decent form himself, but Brodie Grundy's just been dominating around the ground. Was huge last week in Gameday squad with no Cherry. And I think I just back him in the current run of form that he's in
Yep.
to put up something big rather than relying on English sort of maybe getting up a little bit with the matchup for me.
Yeah. I think I agree with you in that regard. In terms of, yes, Tim English has been okay, like in terms of his sort of recent run of form. Just bring up his stats very quickly here. So, in sort of his last sort of 6 games, 133, 161, 96, 130, 136, 111. So, it's nothing to be sort of to scoff at by any means, but we know the form that Brody Grundy has been in. So, if I reckon from a form perspective, even on its own, like he hasn't gone below 130 in the last 8 weeks. Like that's a lock if I've ever seen one. So I think that's there. And then when you combine with Max Gorn, the matchup that he has coming up against Rowan Marshall, I think I feel confident going there. Now I'm a little bit different to you in terms of I don't mind switching up the ruck sort of 1-2 pairing a little bit over the comps, but theoretically, normally in my contender side, that's the one I put exactly the combination that I want in. Classic, then starter. But look, I agree with what you say. If you get a 180 from Team English, who you only have in starter, but you don't have him across comps, you're almost like, well, I've done the research and I know that he was going to score well. Why didn't I just back my gut? But
Mm.
I think we're both in agreement that Gorn and Grundy is the way to go this week in terms of sort of our locks as Ruckman. All
Now,
right.
I will hit you quickly though with a
Okay.
flashpoint here.
All
Max
right.
Gorn has not scored above 120 in game day squad since round 14.
That is a very interesting stat, mate. Now, the reason why I say that is because he's had a tough set of matchups to play. Yes, it has
Yeah,
been probably about a 5 week stretch now, but when you come up against sort of so round 14,
Cherry and
Melbourne had the
Wits,
bye in
I
round
remember.
15. So he's played in 5 games since. He's had Wits, O'Brien, Cherry, and Pitternet. So 4 really tough matchups from a ruck perspective. But now he gets the Rowan Marshall sort of ruck matchup. And it'd be really interesting to see sort of and this is something we're going to look to endeavor to do next year is find this sort of data for you in terms of how players have been going against certain teams in terms of how many points they've been giving up compared to the average necessarily. So stay tuned for that. We're going to try and work as hard as we can to sort of get that data available to you guys, hopefully next year. And that can really underlie what we're talking about here as well. All right, Roscoe avoids. So I'm going to kick us off here. And I think that with possibly some James Jordan attention looming, I don't know which way it goes because I think that Finn Callahan or Lockie Whitfield is going to cop the tag. Whoever doesn't get the tag will probably be okay. I'm going to lean with Lockie Whitfield as just on the outer of my top 7 defenders.
Oh, all right.
I
We'll come
know,
back to that. The top
controversial.
7 defenders. We'll come back to that definitely. But you're picking Lockie Whitfield as your first fade of the week.
He is my first avoid/fade,
Avoid.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now
Who
this is
is your
very
first
tricky.
fade?
I don't know how I can fade a player who scored 200 the week before.
Oh.
But I think Isaac Heaney is one that I don't want to be with this week. I don't know if I like the Giants midfield, and I think at times they can be quite restrictive. He might get a little bit of attention, and the Giants do really need the win, and they'd be wanting nothing more than to put the Swans out of finals, out of their misery for the season. I think it's a tough one for Isaac Heaney, and he's not going to be able to kick 5 every week.
Yeah, look, I can't blame you for going there, mate. Like, in terms of Isaac Heaney, 34 touches, 13 clearances, 5 goals, an exemplar game. But now in a rivalry game, away from home, can he replicate it? I would like to think that there's been some great footage on First Crack about the chemistry that Grundy and Heaney have in terms of their work at stoppage. I'd like to think that the Giants will be a bit more tuned to what's going on in that regard. And yeah, he could be a fade, especially with some of those premium matchups we have in the midfield with Collingwood against Richmond. You could even play Josh Dacos there. The Bulldogs against Essendon. We're going to have Fremantle against West Coast. There's midfield matchups that I prefer to go towards, like you're saying, than a Heaney against the Giants, mate. And that sort of leads me into sort of my second avoid. He's a player that's been in blistering form. His last sort of 6 games, 138, 171, 112, 124, 122, 132. Matty Rowell. Now, Matty Rowell has
Oh,
been an absolute monster in game day squad. But I'll have you know, mate, that he's his second lowest score this season, a score of 72, came against Josh Dunkley and the Brisbane Lions. Because whenever Gold Coast played the Brisbane Lions, Josh Dunkley goes to him. And I don't have the exact data from last year, but if we're just talking about Supercoach data, he hasn't scored over a ton. So 53, 97, and 65 in the last 3 games against the Lions. And that would equate roughly similarly to Gameday squad, with him only scoring 72, which was his second lowest score this season, just behind a 69 for Matt Rowell this year. So yes, it's a risky fade, especially in the blistering form that he's in. Collecting 30 touches, getting those 9 tackles on the weekend against Adelaide. But I think you could fade him and get away with it this week. What do you
Yeah,
think,
he
mate?
did very well as a gold in my contender team last week, unlike
Yeah.
George Hewitt, who didn't do very well at all. Now, my second fade is another midfielder. I think there's a lot of midfielders here who we're avoiding purely just on the circumstance of their matchup is slightly tricky,
Yeah.
and there's just better options. I think Jordan Dawson might be one that we fade as
Mm.
well. It's really tricky considering he was pretty much the best or the second best game day squad midfielder and has been the whole season.
Yeah.
Now, the last couple of weeks he has struggled. He only put up 102 on the Suns in a game where they were playing at home. We thought they would win and he'd be able to score well against a pretty decent midfield matchup. I will say the week before that, he did put up 150. So beware. But before that, 110, 123, 115. They're consistent. Like, it's not awful. He's not going sub-ton by any means. But is he just one where we might have to leave him out?
Yeah.
You know, if you're
Now,
going
you want to
double Frio plus Dacos plus double Bulldogs, you've got one spot left.
yeah. Yeah. Now, do you want a
It
stat
makes
to
it
back
tricky.
this up, mate? So in the first showdown, Jordan Dawson had his second most CBAs for the year, 86%, but he had his season lowest game day squad score against Port Adelaide in the very first showdown this year. So he scored 90. That was his lowest
Ooh,
game day squad score this year. So
yeah,
if you're on the money here, Roscoe, in terms of the matchup, Willem Drew may go to him. I don't hate the fade. And that could be one that could make or break your week. As we see with a lot of these players that we're talking about, these are going to be highly owned players that we recommend considering for or alternating for other options. So there's another one there, mate. I'm going to finish off with one more pod avoid unless you have another one. We've
no,
talked
you
about
go.
Gordon Grundy English. I think that Rowan Marshall is a pretty easy fade this week against Max Gordon.
Yeah,
He hasn't
I
scored well
wouldn't pick
against
him.
Max Gordon in the past. And I just think that, yes, he scored quite well in game day squad this year, but I probably would be looking at other options this week, like the 3 other Brackman we talked about just before. Do you have another avoid, mate?
Not a genuine one. Uh,
Okay.
not a genuine one. Um, there's going to
Who
be
is it?
someone out there. There's going to be someone out there who's crazy enough to leave out Bailey Smith. It's not going to be me,
Ooh.
but he hasn't been putting up the monster scores that we've become accustomed to. His last 3 have not been great, especially with an 85 last week. Before that, 120 and 113, which are decent. I'd say
Yeah.
good, not excellent.
Yes.
They are playing North Melbourne, though. Can you leave him out? I don't really know. Someone will do it out there.
Oh.
I'm not sure if it'll
And
be us.
I can tell you that it's not going to be me. I've got a gold of him in both my classic and my contenders. So
You think
it
you're going to
won't be
go
me.
gold?
I will go gold.
I think I'm going to
I
play
think
in
it's bound
bronze.
back. Okay. I mean, that's hedging your bets, and that's
Yeah.
fair enough. I may go down to silver. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how
Uh-huh.
that goes in terms of the players that sort of pop their head up. But it's a great talking point because he hasn't been in great form, but we just know what he can do on his day. And perhaps
Yeah.
now having playing an extra week, getting through the Saints game, he's just had a really sort of interrupted sort of season in terms of the injuries and the laid out sort of thing. But we just know that he can just score points for Will because he just takes the game on, kicks, marks, all of the jazz like that. All right. Before we sort of talk about some final points, mate, we'll talk about some pods for this week. I'm going to go close to your heart. And I'm going to go with the Man of Steel.
The Man of
Playing against
Steel. I
Melbourne,
like it.
hear this, his last 3 games, he scored 141, 152, 130 with his base
Yeah, he's
card.
going well.
Now, he is a midfielder, and we have talked about how there have been plenty of good midfielders out there. I think he's just flying under the radar a little bit, mate, and he's definitely looking good out there in terms of his fitness and all of that. So that's where I'm looking as a pod. Not personally, but a pod play that you could consider.
Yeah, I've got one who I'm not sure if he will be a potter, if a lot of people will actually use him. Um,
Yeah.
Playing against North, I think Jeremy Cameron will go very well. I'm just saying this because he's a key forward. Bear in mind, he only turned up just against us over the weekend, and he did kick 5. But against North, he historically does go very well. I believe it's 3 of the last 5 matchups against North Melbourne, he's kicked 5 or more. I was looking at that earlier on DFS. I believe he's at least been the top goal kicker anyway, which I think for the most part has been 5 or more. So Jeremy Cameron, I'll probably just slap him in there with a bronze and hope he kicks 6 and see how we go.
No. Well, that's the sort of play that can sort of win you around because you just like, would anyone else be able to take on that sort of risk? What I will say though is like with those key forwards, you're really banking on them scoring goals, but that's where the 8 +8 points for goals really comes in really handy for those key forwards.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I got one more pod for you, mate.
Yeah.
Daniel Rioli's out 4 to 6 weeks. I'm saying lock and load Johnny Noble in against the Lions. I think that this is a great matchup at home. Now, we saw just before the 84 tough game against Adelaide, he'd gone 138, 136, 126. And we know that he was in good form just before that. There was a little bit of a form slump for a couple of weeks, round 15, and he was hundreds plus in most games. So I think that Johnny
Yeah.
Noble is a pod play that we can put as sort of a play in and around the top 7. And I'm going to say this right here, might be a bit of a hot take, but I think I have John Noble ahead of Lockie Whitfield this week.
Yeah, that's definitely a bit of a hot take because I've got Whitfield in there. I don't have Noble. But, this is where it's good. Have a listen to what other people think, possibly change your mind, and then I can come back again next week and give it to you if it goes wrong.
That's it, mate.
Look, I think one more pod that I'm sort of semi considering. Uh, it's not a pod, it's targeting the matchup, but it's just about finding which one I want to play, whether I want to play Libba or Richards or both.
Yeah,
Um, Look, I think all 3 of them and Bont should score pretty well,
yeah,
but Libba and Richards, it's tough because
yeah,
Libba's been scoring slightly better, um, but also Richards, I think, has got a better ceiling.
yeah.
So
Oh, I'd be leaning Liver, mate. Just in a game like this, I just feel like it's just one of those games where it's just going to rack up the pill, honestly.
yeah.
Like, if you're looking for a pod, Liver's the way to go. He's got more consistency as well.
Do you think you could pot it then and pick all 3 in your midfield?
You could. You could. So if you're looking at that kind of midfield, you're probably looking at those 3 plus Nick Dacos plus Andy Brayshaw, maybe a Sack Butters as your 6.
Well, I can give you a quick look at my contender squad here, if you like.
All right, let's go. Let's go.
Let's
Love to see it.
rock and roll into contender so
And
far.
whilst we talk about that, I'm very interested to see who you think are going to be the top 7 defenders this week.
Yeah. So I've gone with the Gold Holmes. I really like it against North Melbourne. Wangani Miller and Sinclair here. Now I've gone with Ash. I think he's usually pretty reliable. And Whitfield, I'm interested to see that you think he might get the Jordan tag. I think you might be right because he did tag Wangani Miller and do a good job there. So he's definitely one to watch. Bailey Dale, I think he stays in. And Dane Zorko, look, I think he can still score pretty well, getting plenty of the ball. Him and Wilmot have been going pretty decent in Gameday squad most weeks. I'm pretty happy to keep him sitting there. Now, the midfield, Brayshaw, Sarong, Bont, Libba Richards, and Dacos. Now, that's just
Yeah.
matchup targeting at its finest. I'm going to be looking to get Bontempelli up to a gold because, as you can see here in the rucks and forwards, I don't have any goals. So I've got 2 goals to play with. I've gone with Gorn and Grundy here. Now we've got Myers, Bailey Smith, and Cameron. Matthew Kennedy, Sam Darcy, and Luke Jackson, who I think can score really well against the Eagles as well. Forward number 7 is another contentious one because I want to pick Pickett, but at the same time, I'm worried that Windhager goes to him again. He had a real stinker up in Alice. So I don't know if Caleb Daniel against
Yep.
Geelong.
Mm-hmm.
Other forward options
Sean
here
Manor.
who we could look at. Manor. I could go Manor, but then I'm going with 4 Geelong. Is that too many?
Look,
I
I
could go
don't
with
think you can
Rankin.
have
I could
too
go with
many.
McRae against Melbourne. McRae's probably not a bad shout, actually. And then, I don't know. Do I have a Pat Voss? I do have a gold Pat
Pat
Voss.
Voss.
Do I do it again and take gold Paddy Voss
Gold Paddy
against the
Voss.
Eagles?
Well, it's only right then I share my screen and go through my contender squad as well, mate. So I'm not sure if
Let's
you can
get
see
into it.
that, but I've got Bronze Ash, Bronze Zorko, Silver Dale, Gold
Mm-hmm.
Holmes, and Gold Naz, along with Bronze Sinclair and Bronze Jordan Clark. So I reckon Jordan Clark is a player that I have sort of sneaking into my top 7. I have Noble 8, and then I have Whitfield. So,
Okay.
and Whitfield, McKerch, they're probably my top 10. These are probably my top 7 here, though. Nick Dacos
Yeah.
Silver, Bont Gold, Sarong, Brayshaw, Goulden, and Dacos. So Goulden's an interesting one because he's on the periphery, but I just know that he's one of those players that you sort of want to have in most of the
He
time.
does go well against the
Um, the,
Giants.
the Giants is a tough matchup, though. Grundy and Gorn, as we've talked about. And then in the forward line, Myers, McRae, Jackson, Pickett is an interesting one. I didn't really think about the Windhager tag for Pickett, but that could happen like it did in Alice Springs. Matty Kennedy, a gold Bailey Smith, and a bronze Sean Manor. So no Jezza Cameron there, but it'll be interesting. Could Jezza towel up another bottom 16? We'll wait and see that. But I think we've talked about everything we wanted to, mate. So
Yeah.
before we sort of go on and into another exciting Game Day Squad video, we'll just wrap up and just very quickly recap our locks, avoids, and pods. So our locks, you mentioned Bont, Brayshaw, and Dale. I mentioned Holmes, Nick Dacos, and Naz, and we both agreed that Gordon and Grundy is the way to go in the racks. As avoids, you mentioned Isaac Heaney, Jordan Dawson, and Bailey Smith, and I went with Lockie Whitfield, Rowan Marshall, and Matty Rowell. And as pods, you went with Jeremy Cameron, Libba, and Richards. We'll put them as a 2 forward
Yeah. A
combo, and
pair.
I went with Jack Steele and Johnny Noble. So there are our locks, avoids, and pods for this week. Put it down in the comments section who your biggest lock, avoid, and pod is for the round. We've loved the engagement we've got on this sort of video. As always, if you put it down in the comments, we'll make a random draw, and at least at one of you, guys will be getting a 9-player rare pack. Yes, rare pack. Just for commenting. So if you guys have been enjoying these kinds of videos, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. So much more Game Day Squad video content coming out for Aussie Rules and Roscoe.
Some very exciting other games as well.
We'll
We'll
leave
leave
it
it at
at
that for
that for
now.
now. But yes, some very exciting Game Day Squad videos coming out very, very shortly. Well, thanks so much, Roscoe, for joining me for this video. And we'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Good luck.